Hey, it's Martyn Lee here, and today we celebrate World Photography Day from a motorsport point of view. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by an F1 legend, Stephen T from LAT Images. Stephen, thanks for joining us today.
You're very welcome. Nice to see you.
When we first started working together, different things. Of course, I work in video and audio, and you work in photography. But once we had you on the Autosport podcast a long time ago, we started talking about your work and your photography. I started to become a little bit obsessed with watching out for you on the Formula One coverage. And then once you do see the photographers at work, it's amazing the work you guys do. We'll get into that in just a second, but some background first of all, if you could. How did you end up being a professional photographer in the world's most exciting sports?
I had a very lucky route into it. My grandfather was the proprietor of Motorsport magazine, which he took over in the 1920s, and my father went to work for him after he'd done his national service just after the war, was at the first ever Grand Prix as a photographer. And from being the Motorsport magazine's photographers, things grew quite quickly. Not quite quickly, but in the 60s, things started to move quite quickly into commercial stuff. People wanted to buy pictures to use for adverts, etc. And so we started. My father started LAT Images, which was called LAT Photographic back then, and we've been going ever since.
And now people know what you look like. For anyone that didn't, they might catch you on the coverage, and it's funny how ever present you are in Formula One, and yet you're there to capture the most iconic photographs that we all see. But somehow you kind of fly under the radar as well, because the cameras are obviously focused on the drivers and the action. But if people do bother just to look a little bit away from that, they'll often see the photographers hard at work. And you, well, we've been doing this a very long time now, and you occupy some of the most privileged positions in the sport. You really do get very up close and personal. Can you just explain sort of a typical weekend and where people can find you on the grid?
Yeah, well, I'm the team photographer for McLaren. Within LAT, we work for four of the teams. We work for Mercedes, we work for McLaren, we work for Haas, and we work for Aston Martin. But my particular role is McLaren. So depending on whether I'm in the if I'm in the garage, you do tend to get into the background of pictures, even the background of the font pictures, even though you're trying not to. Obviously, it's impossible to know which camera is filming what, and they've got multi cameras in the pits. And then if you have a good weekend, you get access to the Parc Ferme area. So I shot Lando and Oscar with their second and third in qualifying, and then obviously was up close and personal when Lando got out of the car, getting his second place in the race, which was amazing. Actually, it's been a tough year for McLaren, and it was great to see things turning round.
I'm pretty sure at Silverstone I saw you again on the coverage, either kneeling or even laying on the ground, just to get that perfect, most iconic shot. And then I'm pretty sure that shortly afterwards I did see some of those photographs maybe on websites around the world. And so when these moments happen, and it was a great weekend, as you say, for McLaren. It's great to see you guys at work and telling the story of those races for us. To celebrate World Photography Day, we're going to take a look at some of your favourite Formula One photographs. So you're able to talk us through some of your favourites that you've picked out. Where do you want to start?
I'll start with Ayrton Senna's first win, 1985, in Portugal. It was my first full season. I'd done some races in 1984, but it was my first full season. We were working for Lotus and for John Player, who were the sponsor on the car at the time. I'd come up from Formula 3 with Ayrton, so I knew him quite well from photographing him in the lower formulas. And it was a ghastly day. The rain came in just before the start of the race, and it was an absolutely hideous day to be a photographer. Everyone was soaked. And we got to the end of the race, and he was obviously going to win his first Grand Prix. And I felt quite, as a young photographer, felt a load of pressure on me to get something different. Managed to find myself a little spot as the cars came into the pit lane before they disappeared into the Parc Ferme area, and managed to get this shot, which is Peter Waugh celebrating. Peter Waugh is the team boss, celebrating Ayrton. Ayrton's half out the car. It's shot in black and white, which I think, because we used to shoot in colour and black and white in those days, and it was far too dark to shoot in colour. So I decided to do the podium in black and white. Yeah, it's just one of my favourite pictures. It's just for all those reasons.
And it is such an iconic image. The happiness on, you can see Peter's face, and obviously, and still in the car at the time. So you don't know in '85, you don't know what shot you've got until those photographs are developed, which I can imagine is entirely different to the digital world you live in. Just explain a little bit for us about the two different eras of film and digital, and what it's like when you process that photograph and you see something like this and you realize you've caught something, that sheer joy on his face, that something really special.
Yeah, and this is a great example of that, because we were all at the airport after the race, and Peter Warr came over and said, "I hope you got some good pictures from today. You can't begin to believe how important this is," and etc. etc. And so then you start really panicking. So we get back to London, go straight into the dark room, process the films, drop the colour films off at the colour processors, and in this case, sort of wait the half an hour for the film to come out. Even before it's drying, or it's dry, you're sort of having a quick look at it before you put it in the drying cabinet. And I could see it had potential, and then obviously put it on the light box, make sure it's sharp, and then a massive sigh of relief. And those pictures are then, back then obviously the pictures were sent through the post so we would produce 6 colour transparencies and 6 black and white prints from each race for John Player and for Lotus, and they get sent out to all of their affiliations around the world. And those, but I also sent Peter Warr a copy, and he liked it enough to put it on his wall in Heffel. So I guess that was the proof of the pudding in that one.
Absolutely, and such an iconic car as well, that Lotus Renault, and it's in Parc Fermé, which, looking at that photograph now, there's some metal fencing and keeping a few people back. But how has that changed in terms of the access over the years? Is it better? Is it worse? What's it like as a professional photographer working in an environment like that, where there's so few privileged people?
Well, the two guys in the left-hand corner of the picture are Kenny and Clive, who were famously the two famous tyre guys who looked after the Lotus team. So they're the team, and then as you say, there's just a few random people standing around the outside. In those days, it was all very higgledy-piggledy. It depended on where the race was, where they stopped. It's a lot more regimented now. Obviously, there's branding around there. So you couldn't go into Parc Fermé back then. In fact, we probably have a little bit more access now, because they'll let the winning teams photographers into the Parc Fermé, and in this case, as we were discussing before about Silverstone, because it was such a great result for McLaren, we got access as well. So it's very different. There's a lot more people, a lot more photographers now, a lot more film crews. They let the VIP guests down there now as well. So if you're not there early, you're not going to get within sort of about 50 feet of where the cars are. It's changed subtly over the years, so you don't really notice it. But then, as you said with this picture, it sort of brings it all home.
Okay, what have you got next for us?
Okay, next it's another Parc Fermé picture. Actually, it's Fernando Alonso, who's the driver I probably worked with closest. I worked with him all the way through his Renault career, and then we're working with him again now. He's at Aston Martin, and I worked with him at McLaren, obviously. This was the period when we didn't work that closely with him because he was at Ferrari. But it was his first win in his first Grand Prix for Ferrari in Bahrain, and he is without doubt the king of the celebrations. He's promised me when Aston Martin do win again, he'll be right back where he was with celebrating properly. And this is just for me, it's just an iconic picture. He just says it all. It says it all. It's clean. It's him on the car. Lovely late afternoon light on him. And even though he's got a helmet on, you can see the joy of the joy he gets from winning, basically.
And just if you could talk to us a little bit about the importance of capturing an image like this, because we are probably more used to, certainly as a Formula One fan, watching the television coverage, which is fast moving, and the television cameras capture a certain aesthetic and a certain amount of detail. But when you show us, as you mentioned, you can, even though he's got his helmet on, you can almost feel like you can see him even without it, because we've got time to soak in that image with a photograph, with more detail. What's the difference between the two types of imagery that comes out of a Formula One weekend.
You're exactly right. It is just about you're trying to capture that unique moment. You know, it was Cartier-Bresson who came up with that, wasn't it? There's a perfect moment for every picture, and this was one of those. But also, you have to be in the right place at the right time. The TV cameras obviously can roam around; they can move as they're filming. We pick a spot, and you're stuck with that spot. You know, so whether it be low down from the rear, from the side, and in this case, I was lucky enough to get access to the pit building above the podium and Parc Fermé, and so that's probably the unique part of it, because I think there was one other photographer there, but we were the only two to get that picture. So it's about trying to get something that's unique, and that, as a photographer, especially nowadays with there being so many, if you can get something that nobody else has got, then you've done your job properly, basically.
Well, we hoped one day to see another Fernando Alonso top step of the podium celebration. Aston Martin have built a fantastic car this year in 2023. It might need a little bit of an unusual result, some reliability, something going on with Max Verstappen or a mistake, but never ever count out Fernando Alonso, and we can't wait to see if that picture gets taken of him winning again in Formula One. We can't wait to see it. All right, let's move on. What's next?
The next one is probably the picture that I'm most famous for, which was it's the Verstappen fire picture from 1994 Hockenheim Grand Prix. I was working for Benetton in those days, so I had access through the garage to the front of the garage. It was a very, very hot day. I'd been out, done the start of the race from the stadium section, and it very much settled into a bit of a procession, so I thought I'd go back and capture the pit stops. And I literally walked through the Benetton garage just as the guys were getting ready to do their pit stop. And I wasn't necessarily on the right lens. I was on a 7200 zoom. So I thought I'll see what I can get from this angle, because there's no time to change lenses or anything. It was literally about to happen. So Jos came in. They fitted the fuel hose. It went for a bit, and then all of a sudden, 1 minute I was shooting the side of the car. And with Jos in it and the fuel guys. Next minute, it was just literally a massive explosion, which I did keep shooting through, and the fire was out within milliseconds. It was a very, very flash thing. I think it was vapor on the hot engine cover that ignited it. And then this photo is a guy. The chief mechanic was Paul Seavey, and he was one of the fuel guys. And it's him turning away from the fire. Luckily, unlike me being in shorts and t-shirt, he's in full overalls and had goggles on. And he only had a few superficial burns from it, which is nice. But I then tried to help put a couple of the guys out with some tire blankets, and then sort of retreated because obviously there was quite a big kerfuffle going on. Going back to what we were talking about on the Senna one, this was shot on film as well, so I had no idea what I'd taken, even less of an idea than the Senna one, because it was literally all I saw was a big orange blur in my lens, and got back, processed the films, again, looked on the light box. 3 frames were completely out of focus. One was quite a lot of movement in Paul, and then there's this one frame, it's almost so sharp that it doesn't. It looks like it's been a setup from a movie or something. It's almost too good to be true. So it's an amazing moment. I think it sort of encapsulates that whole scenario in one frame. And going back to what we were saying, it's literally the decisive moment again.
And what was that like for you in that moment? In terms of, did you feel an intensity of heat? Were you close enough to really be knocked off your feet? And what's the human nature thing to do? Is it to as a photographer all your life, is it just to kind of have that muscle memory of carry on taking photos, and then you sort of shield yourself, or what did you personally do?
You're right. I mean, I don't think I thought about it at all. There was no time to think about it, but I did take pictures, but there was obviously nothing conscious about that. That's just what I did. So it did feel hot. I didn't suffer any burns. As I say, it was a flash fire. I was probably 5 or 6 meters away from the car. So, but it was afterwards. Well, you put your lens down and you see the mini carnage of it all with mechanics running around, with bits of their suits on fire, etc., etc. That then it hits home. But at the actual moment of it happening, I just shot it, without even thinking about it. So I guess, yeah, there is some muscle memory there or something.
Yeah. And we haven't gone through we haven't seen all of your photographs yet, but you have already mentioned that perhaps you're most famous for this iconic image. And it's interesting that this isn't, you're not telling us that your most iconic image is, you got up at 5 a.m. one day and found the perfect spot and stalked that favorite, that shot for hours on end, and you did it was all very conscious. This is something that happened in the moment. You were just lucky enough to be there, and yet it's sort of, lightning strikes, so to speak, and magic happens. And, it's kind of interesting that it was a happy accident. Nobody was hurt, but this wasn't pre-planned in any kind of way. It's really interesting.
No, it's total reportage. It's complete opposite to you're describing. The guy gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go climb up a mountain to get the early morning light or whatever. 10 days running because and then eventually it comes. We're living very much in the moment. I mean, obviously we do lots and lots. We take loads and loads of pictures, more creative side of things, for over the course of the weekend, and they're very pleasing as well. But I think if you can only pick 5 or 6 pictures from a career of 40 years, it's going to be the moment more than anything else at the end of the day, and that's what people will remember you for. A beautiful pan shot through the trees somewhere is lovely, but that's not a defining moment, is it? Again.
All right. Well, let's see some more of those moments. What have you picked out next?
Okay. Well, the next one is another very reportage one. It's Romain Grosjean's shunt in Spa, the first corner, which I think he was going over the top of Fernando Alonso at the time as well. So Fernando's involved. This was photographed from lots and lots of angles, but I always do the start of the Belgian Grand Prix on the inside of the hairpin of the first corner, just because I think it's such a unique place with or without accidents happening. It's a unique angle on the start. We're lucky enough at LAT to have a team of photographers, so we don't have to all be, at the first corner or up at Eau Rouge. There's opportunities to do a slightly different start. So this is shot on a fisheye lens, which and literally is the accident's happening closer than the camera is away from me. And again, it's about that: do you shoot or do you run? And I didn't. There were a couple of photographers around me when the start happened. I shot the whole sequence, and this frame is probably the most dramatic. And then I looked around me to say to the guy next to me, "Wow," and he wasn't there anymore, and he was about 30 feet back, So clearly didn't take the picture and decided on flight instead. So again, I didn't think about it, but I just kept my finger on the button and shot it. That's the story of that picture.
And I think what this shows as well is, being such a dramatic accident, what comes to my mind at least is modern regulations with the halo. And these kind of accidents is, I think, why the halo is such a brilliant thing, because it stops any risk to a very horrible accident to a driver. And so it's interesting with these photographs that you've picked out, that this gives us a snapshot, if you will, in time, not only about Formula One, but regulations change over the years, the cars, the shape, and one of those things is safety as well. And you look at a photograph like this, and the thing that strikes me is, well, actually the cars are pretty significantly different now, because they have that extra bit over the drivers. So that's almost a little more shocking when you see a photograph like this as well, because thankfully nobody was hurt.
I think this was one of the big catalysts to that happening, wasn't it? It could have ended more than one driver's life with the way that Romain was flying on top of everybody. I'm pretty sure Fernando must have had skid marks on the top of his helmet, but it certainly sped the process up and got everybody talking about it. It's been sort of ruminated for years, hasn't it? But I think this began to sort of get everybody going down the same route. The drivers weren't necessarily that keen on it at the beginning. The photographers weren't necessarily keen on it at the very beginning, because it takes away some of the access to the drivers, and you don't see them as well. Not when I first started in the 90s, if you remember, when Senna was in the McLaren, you could see most of his was certainly below his shoulders, down almost down to his elbows in the cars they were in. I don't think a modern Formula One driver would be very comfortable driving like that now. So it was the right thing to do. The halo is definitely the right thing to do, and we've all got used to it now, haven't we? You hardly notice it. So and that just shows things moving on.
Absolutely. Okay, and let's move on ourselves. What's next?
Next is it's another picture from Spa, so not taken that far away from the last one, which was the accident. So it's at the end of the race in Spa. This was that famous race where Michael and Mika were going at it, hammer and tongs up the straight to the top of the hill, out of Eau Rouge up to Le Combe, I think it's called, and Michael was placing his car brilliantly, as he always did, and making it difficult for Mika to get past. And then on one particular lap, Mika made a little bit of a lunge, and Ricardo Zonta was in the middle of the track. So Michael went left. Mika must have shut his eyes and just gone right, and just decided he was going for it, and appeared with two wheels on the grass the other side of Ricky Zonta. Then obviously had the racing line for Le Combe and made the overtaking manoeuvre and went on to win the Grand Prix. This picture's taken at Parc Ferme, which in those days was on the inside of the hairpin, because they used to stop them straight away because it's such a long slowdown lap there. They'd literally cross the line and then pull straight in. And I just happened to be there because I thought it might make some interesting pictures, and I knew we'd be able to get close to them. And I looked round and saw the two of them talking, and you can see that Mika's explaining exactly what I've just explained to you to Michael, and Michael's not looking very happy about it. But if you can't get the actual incident, then if you can get something that is associated with the incident, then that's sometimes it's as good, if not better.
It's interesting that this reminds me of the Michael Schumacher documentary. I think it's perhaps Ross Brawn in that, where he says that on one occasion it was not until Michael got back to the pits and they literally had to show him a replay to explain, no, this was your fault, this incident, because as the competitive machine that he is, he saw things in such a single-minded way, and sometimes you literally needed explaining to him, like is happening here. Talk to me, if you will, a little bit about the interesting part of your job as a sports photographer. So many sports, the people are visible all of the time because it's a ball sport or something, whereas you have a very different challenge, if you like, or an opportunity that sometimes you're shooting machine and sometimes you're shooting person, and then it's interesting what you do to capture the different essences of the sport that we cover. A human sport that is very engineering led, so you want to see those machinery shots, but also you want to see the humanity behind it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think being a Formula One photographer, you have to have all those skills, because we do we are part of the circus. I'm working with McLaren, so my brief for the weekend will include action shots, but it will also include stuff of the drivers, whatever that may be, cool stuff of them walking around, cool stuff of them doing things, set up pictures for sponsors. So you need to be proficient in lots of different ways. You need to be able to use studio lights. We have a little sort of studio set up that travels around the world with us. You need to be able to use everything from a fisheye lens through to a 600mm lens. So I think as a sports photographer, it's probably the sport that you need to be the most rounded in. If you're a football photographer, in the main, you're obviously, as you said, you're seeing the people, but you're only seeing them one dimensionally. You're sitting on the side of the pitch. You shoot the football match, and then you go home. You're not having breakfast with them, you're not having lunch with them, and you're not sort of giving them a high five once they come out to the motorhome after the race. So I think from that point of view, it's a great sport to be a photographer in.
Right, we've got a couple more to have a look at. What is next?
Okay, well, next is to go to your human interesting. It's a very simple picture of the great Ayrton Senna when he was at his absolute peak in the McLaren days. At this period, McLaren were already beginning to restrict access to their garage, because there was a time when a photographer could just wander into any of the team garages, take a few pictures and leave, because there weren't so many of us and we were all known to the team and everybody put up with it. The team themselves had a lot less personnel as well, so there was no issue with space. But then McLaren started to get a little bit more controlling over, quite rightfully controlling over Ayrton, because he was getting such a big star that more and more people wanted a slice of him. And I just happened to be walking past. It was at the back of the McLaren garage, which was actually a tent in Montreal, and there was a little sort of corner flapping, and I could see Ayrton doing what he always did, which is studying the data intently. And then there's nobody else around, and I just stuck my lens in through the little gap in the tent and got these frames, and then walked away. And I just think it sums him up. Basically, it also sums up the technology of the time, because that screen he's looking at is what they used to have on the sitting in front of them on the on the cockpit, and it was considered to be such a sophisticated thing. It was just a little TV monitor with the data on it, but only the first to six and the times, etc. Nothing else. So I think again it encapsulates a time, and it sums up Ayrton basically.
Yeah, so what he's doing here is obviously as part of his job, but if he hadn't explained he was looking at a timing monitor, and I just saw that photograph, I might presume that he was having a moment to himself, a moment of reflection, a very personal moment, and he probably is as well, because he's at work and he's doing his job. But it could be something else. If he wasn't looking at a timing screen, he could just be having a very personal moment. And what's it like for you, knowing that you are almost intruding on that moment to bring that to the rest of us Formula One fans, to tell that story for us?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I probably only took 4 or 5 frames of it, and then decided to move on. I didn't want to disturb him, but it's not something that he would have had an issue with. It's not something the team would have an issue with. I mean, they made it more difficult to get it, but there's nothing more than that to it. But though these are the pictures that again, I think still photography can really show what goes on behind the scenes in one frame. That wouldn't have worked as a video, as a moving image. So it's just nice to get the little personal things, and again, something that nobody else has got. I know I'm the only person that's got that image. I mean, there's plenty of cool images of Senna, but this is just one of the ones. And I've got plenty of cool images of Senna. He was a very intense guy, but this is just one that it just appeals to me in its simplicity, I think.
Yeah, me too, because there's nothing happening apart from the man, and there's lots happening inside his head, I'm sure. But it's it's not a crash or it's not a fire. It's such a wonderful image. All right, I think we have one more to have a look at. Tell us about this one.
We do, and so I thought I'd bring it more up to date. So this is a photo from this year's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. It's a pretty cool track, actually, and it's also a night race. I mean, when I did Formula One for the first 20, maybe even 25 years, races were always at 2:00 on a Sunday. Practice was always at the prescribed times. The only time you got any interesting light was morning warm up on a Sunday morning, because that was at sort of 7:30. So most of the time you're shooting the cars when the sun is high in the sky, which is not the best. Not the best time to do photography, but they've introduced different timings now. We've got sort of day-night races, which Jeddah is. We've got night races. We're going to have races next year on a Saturday, which is unheard of in my period. But this circuit is very, very fast, very, very dangerous. I think some of the guys say, but it does throw up lots of opportunities for great pictures. The circuit do a brilliant job of looking after the media and looking after the photographers. We get given access to the buildings around the circuit, so to do stuff, and they're very, very proactive on that. So it's a race I really enjoy. This picture is taken in the pit lane. It's a very small pit lane because it's not purpose built. It's a night shot. I was on the pit wall, and I'd done quite a few pit stops in this race, and I'd done quite a few of them already, and I just thought I'd do something a little bit different. So I'd put the shutter speed down to about 1/6 of a second. You pan the car coming into the pit stop, and then you pan the car coming out, and you don't really know what you're getting, but you get some nice effects. And it's just the play on pink, and the slightly wobbly lines where my pan hasn't been completely smooth. I just think as a photo that you take to try and create rather than it being created in front of you, if you get that right, it's quite pleasing. This picture was used. GP Racing used it as a parade, which is always a nice thing to get, because it's one of the GP Race is one of the few magazines in print format that still use photographs big. So it's great for photographers to see their work not only published but published in print. It's becoming a rare thing now.
Totally agree. I'm a sucker for something coming through my letterbox, and that's just because whether that's an automotive magazine or a motorsport magazine, I know that we live in a fast-paced world, and the instantness of social media, and even the websites that we all read our motorsport news on are great, and obviously we have those ourselves. But then to sit down, maybe when the house is quiet or whatever, and to open up, even a magazine hasn't got to be a fancy book or anything, but just to stare at a picture longer than you would on screen. But also, there's such a difference, isn't there, between looking at a photograph on screen? You can appreciate it, but then when you kind of hold something and you're sitting in a chair or something and you can stare at it for a little bit longer, it's such a subtle difference, but it's a really important one.
No, I totally agree. And a lot of what we do now, obviously, as you say, is instant. And we're dealing with Instagram a lot and with other social media channels with our photography. And you have to shoot things slightly differently for that. Formats are slightly different, so it's more a square imagery, obviously slightly over square. So you take that into account when you're shooting. But the biggest thing is people pause on a photo, maybe on Instagram it's maybe for 2 seconds or something. So you're not necessarily going to see all the detail A on your phone screen, and B, if you're flicking through a whole load, it's always about next, isn't it? Whereas if you pick up a GP Racing or, as you say, any of these magazines, you've got the opportunity to look at it, read the caption, look at it again, and it's a completely different thing. I suppose it's a little bit like we all get our music now on Apple Music, etc., but there's nothing nicer than sitting down with an album that's on vinyl, taking it out of the cover, putting it onto the player and listening to it that way in the order that it was meant to be played in. I think magazines are going almost the same way as that, aren't they? And they're getting a bit of a retro. There's a retro kickback to it because people do like they do like it. It's never going to be what it was, and obviously vinyl sales are never going to be what they were. But there is definitely a pleasure to be got out of it, out of both those things.
Absolutely. Vinyl sales on the increase, I read, as more recently. Now, let's finish off by talking about some advice for anyone watching to take their own photographs of Formula One. Now, I tried to find my first Formula One photograph to show you so that you could laugh and go, well, that's nothing. But it's as someone who takes photographs occasionally and loves Formula One, I can remember it fondly. And so just to set the scene, we're at touring cars and at Silverstone in 93, I think. And my dad happened to know somebody who worked in marketing, and they said, oh, hey, so McLaren are testing here with Mika Hakkinen on the back circuit, and I'm doing some work for them. Do you want me to take you over there? So we jumped in the people carrier, took us over the bridge, and there was the little testing tent with Mika Hakkinen and McLaren, and they were doing some testing there, which was great. And I was allowed to stand the other side of the Armco barrier. Unthinkable these days. Who's this random 15-year-old kid? And I had like a little Canon camera with some film on. It wasn't quite a wind-on camera. It was automatic by then. And who knows what I was taking, but when I had it developed, just a shot of a Formula One car, but it was in focus, and it meant the world to me. It's nothing special, but I can still, and I just can't find it to show you. There's nothing in that, but it's personal, and it means a lot. And it's just a Formula One car, but I love it. And so any advice that you could give to the people like us who want to take a picture from the grandstands, what's the best way to do that and feel really satisfied with what we take?
I think the thing to do is to try and use your position as an advantage rather than a disadvantage. I mean, obviously the advantage we've got is we've got access to the side of the track, which is becoming more restricted, but we still are as close to the cars as you can get to, and that's not the case for people that are in the grandstands for obvious safety reasons and things, and there's often fences in the way, etc. But I think the thing to do is to try and maybe use the vans and around you as the focus of the picture, but with the cars in the background. So try and create your own image from where you are and try and tell the story of where you are. Or if you're just a general admission spectator and you're wandering around, just try and find an interesting bank somewhere that might have a tree on it or something, or some people down below you, and make the picture up from that. You know, you in very few races are you going to be able to get a big in the frame shot of the cars. It's not going to be impossible. There are certain places, but somewhere like Monaco, there are places where you can be literally walking around in not even in the the track confines, just in Monaco, and you'll suddenly see there's a gap between two buildings, and the cars are whizzing past. Things like that would be a satisfying photo to get. Monaco's Monaco. Not everyone's going to be going to Monaco, but there's other circuits that are similar to that. Where you can get reasonably close from a spectator point of view. The banks up in Spa are not too bad. If you're at the front there, you can. So it's, I suppose it's about trying to make the most of where you are, thinking outside the box a little bit, and trying to build a picture around starting with where you are on the track.
Right, final question. 2 questions, sort of. What's the best part and the worst part of being a Formula One photographer?
Well, when I was a kid, and I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps, I wanted to travel. I wanted to take photos, and I wanted to go to Grand Prix races. So the best part of my job is that I'm lucky enough to still be doing that, and have done that for 40 years. The downside, I suppose, is there's probably a little bit on the travel side as well. Is sometimes getting to an airport to be, having done a 13-hour day at the track and being told that your flight's been delayed by 2 hours or something like that. But that's probably as downside as it gets. Being away from family a lot, another downside. But neither of those things are down enough to compete with the ups of the upside. So I've got no regrets and have no issues with anything really. I just feel I'm very lucky.
And it is hard work. I can honestly say that you guys all put in a proper shift. Last time I was watching from start finish, and you were just watching the Formula One circus happen, and I saw you come out and start work, and it was after I'd started working here, and so I'd met you and I knew what you looked like, and I thought I'd just watch Stephen at work, and it was at Paul Ricard, and you were just non-stop for every second. There's no sort of wandering around thinking, what should I take a photograph off next? I think you're probably with McLaren at the time, and you were putting in a proper shift, and that's before the race had even started. So I'm sure that after every weekend you need a few minutes to just get some downtime before the next one. But the seasons are getting ever longer, and I'm sure that there's I think next year even more travel to do though. So thank you for everything that you do to bring us the story of Formula One.
No, you're welcome, and I hope people enjoy the pictures that they see. At the end of the day, that's what we're doing it for, aren't we? We're doing it we're professional photographers. We're doing it to show the sport in the best way we can, and to hope that people enjoy that.
Very much so. Well, thank you for joining us for a really special edition of a video on the channel today. If you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up. It tells us you liked it, and we'll make more like this. And leave us a comment below. Maybe there's a favourite photograph you've got of Formula One that you want to talk about in the comments, or maybe you just want to have a discussion around photographing your favourite sport. We'd love to know what's on your mind. Leave us a comment below, and we look forward to seeing it. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.